We can't protect you anymore. This isn't the standard alert you've learned to ignore. This was a message from the Israeli government to 7 million people. An unprecedented admission that the entire system has failed. The collapse was systematic. Iran's two-stage strategy first blinded the network's radar, its eyes, with satellite imagery confirming the destruction of key US THAAD systems in the region. Then, they exhausted its interceptor missiles, its fists. Here's what that means on the ground. The early warning buffer, once 15 to 25 minutes, is now just 60 to 90 seconds. That's not a defense system, it's a countdown clock. And this is where the real breakdown for your portfolio begins. The official narrative you are being fed, that this is a containable regional conflict, has just been proven physically false. The same flawed logic is now infecting the economic forecasts and market analysis you rely on to protect your capital. That systemic failure isn't just a headline. It is now the direct driver of the volatility in your accounts. The official story you're being told is that Iran is collapsing and the situation is under control. The data shows the exact opposite. This analysis will show you how by focusing on the gap between what powerful people are saying and what the weapons are actually doing. First, we will break down the military reality on the ground. Then, we will connect that reality directly to your portfolio. So, let's begin by dismantling the core assumption poisoning market analysis. This comforting idea that Iran is about to fold. The official story, repeated by former President Trump 7 times in the last week, is that Iran is about to surrender. But the physics of this conflict demonstrate the precise opposite. What was a proxy war has catastrophically escalated into direct state-on-state warfare. Iran's retaliation was not an act of desperation. It was a pre-planned demonstration of overwhelming, coordinated strength. In a single operational night, they launched over 400 missiles and drones. This wasn't a symbolic gesture. It was a multi-front assault hitting targets in 5 separate countries: Iraq, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, Israel, and the UAE. And while under attack, Iran's institutions are not crumbling. They are proving profoundly resilient. They are proceeding with the orderly selection of a new supreme leader, signaling stable governance in a time of war. Simultaneously, their advanced hypersonic missiles have reportedly penetrated US-made THEE defense systems, a feat of engineering that fundamentally changes the strategic calculus. Therefore, the narrative of an imminent collapse is not merely inaccurate. It is a dangerously flawed intelligence assessment. We are not facing a brittle regime on the verge of surrender. We are facing a resilient and highly capable adversary prepared for a long conflict. So the first part of the equation is now clear. The adversary is far stronger than the official story admits. But understanding Iran's capability is only half of the risk analysis. The real danger, the variable that multiplies the risk to your capital, is the catastrophic flaw in our own side's response. If you don't understand how our strategy is actively making this crisis worse, you are still blind to the true threat. So what is this catastrophic flaw? It is the decision, right now, by Washington and London to double down. In response to a crisis they don't understand, they are sending more high-value military assets into the conflict zone. The USS George H.U. Bush Carrier Strike Group is being deployed. The UK is readying its own carrier and bombers. From a political perspective, this is presented as leverage, a show of commitment, but from a strategic and physics standpoint, it is a catastrophic blunder. You do not place your most valuable multi-billion-dollar assets within the striking range of an adversary who has already proven they possess hypersonic missiles that can penetrate your defenses. Tehran has explicitly stated that anything entering these waters will be sunk. This deployment isn't a deterrent, it's providing a high-value target and daring them to shoot. Here is the core of the miscalculation. Washington calls it leverage. Tehran calls it a target. And while history will decide which is right, the physics of the situation already have an opinion. This move reveals the fatal flaw in Western strategy. It's being driven by political optics and the need to project strength rather than a rational assessment of the military reality. It transforms expensive military hardware into high-risk political symbols. Losing a carrier would be a national trauma, but the consequences are far more immediate and systemic. Because this isn't just about one ship. It is about the narrow channel of water that ship is sailing into. It's about the Strait of Hormuz. And the process of shutting down the global economy by closing that strait. That process has already begun, and here is the physical proof. Satellite imagery from this morning shows the once bustling Strait of Hormuz is now nearly empty water. That empty water is why your positions are bleeding, and your next shipment is delayed by 3 weeks. We are translating a military event into a line item on your P&L statement. The immediate financial impact is not subtle. Daily rates for very large crude carrier tankers, the workhorses of global energy, have skyrocketed from approximately $120,000 to $420,000. Brent crude surged nearly 10% in the opening days. This is the seed of the inflation you will see in your energy bills and logistics costs next quarter. Now here is the critical distinction. Most market commentary will label this as a temporary price shock. And that is a profound and expensive analytical error. What you are witnessing is not a blip. It is a permanent rewriting of the global economic map. The physics of the situation are clear. War risk insurance premiums for the region have risen between 50 and 300%. This makes the old just-in-time supply chain model, the bedrock of modern efficiency, mathematically unviable. The era of cheap lean logistics is over. Period. This forces a structural shift. Companies are now mandated to undertake costly reconfigurations. Building expensive inventory buffers they tried to eliminate for decades, and rerouting ships for weeks around Africa. According to Gartner, this kind of disruption triggers an average 40% surge in the cost to serve for a business. Economists at Goldman Sachs are already forecasting a sustained 0.3 to 0.4 percentage point addition to global inflation from this crisis alone. This is a new, permanent tax on the global system, squeezing margins and devaluing entire sectors reliant on global trade. The system you built your portfolio on no longer exists. The challenge now is not to predict the next headline, but to operate within this new, high-cost reality where official narratives are useless. But how do you quantify this risk? How do you distinguish between the political noise and the physical reality that is now dictating market outcomes? There is a way to model this. A framework that bridges the gap between what they are telling you and what your balance sheet is screaming at you. That framework exists, and it wasn't built by a pundit on a news channel. It was developed inside the Federal Reserve. It's called the Caldara-Yacoviello Geopolitical Risk Index, or GPER Index. It doesn't rely on opinions. Think of it as a quantitative global listening device. It systematically scans major newspapers and simply counts the frequency of words related to geopolitical tension. It measures the reality of conflict, not the rhetoric of control. And this current conflict has caused a massive, undeniable spike in the GPR index, So when you ask, if officials say things are under control, why is my entire portfolio in chaos? This is the data-driven answer. The physics of the market already have an opinion. Decades of econometric research are clear, including the original 2022 paper by Caldara and Iacoviello. It shows a GPR index shock of this magnitude reduces US stock prices and systemically drives up volatility, regardless of what politicians are saying. This is the system break. The GPR index is quantifying a risk premium that the market sees, even if official narratives refuse to acknowledge it. It is the mathematical reason your portfolio is experiencing this shock. Now that you have this framework, does it finally explain the disconnect between calm official statements and the chaos in your own portfolio? Let me know in the comments which of your assets has been the most unexpectedly affected. But this tool isn't just for understanding the past, it's for modeling the future. If a GPR spike this severe is already a reality, what does that imply for the long-term viability of the entire Western strategic response? What happens when the physics of risk collide with the politics of hope? When the physics of risk collide with the politics of hope, the physics always win. And the physics of this conflict spell out a clear, hard truth. For the current Western strategy, there is no viable path to victory. Let's perform the autopsy on its three pillars. First, the pillar of military dominance. The assumption was absolute technological overmatch. That assumption is now broken. Iran's advanced weapons are dictating the terms of engagement, and the West is losing a slow, grinding war of attrition. The mathematics are simply unsustainable. Data shows that critical interceptor missile stocks, the Patriots, the THAADs, are being depleted at a rate that production cannot match. Second, economic strangulation. For decades, the belief was that sanctions would starve the regime into submission. This has failed. 45 years of this pressure have not created a fragile state. They have forged a resilient, battle-hardened economy with deep alternative supply chains. The system was pressure-tested long before this war began. And third, the hope for internal social collapse. This pillar has not just failed, it has backfired. External aggression, as it so often does, has not fractured Iranian society. It has galvanized it, increasing national cohesion and silencing the very dissent the strategy required for success. The unstated goal was always regime change. Former President Trump stated it openly. Install an American-aligned leadership and take control of Iran's resources. But you cannot achieve that against a nation of 90 million people who have spent half a century preparing for this exact fight. The strategy is built on assumptions that reality has already falsified. There is no viable path forward. There is no exit strategy. There is only the cold, hard verdict the physics of this situation have already delivered. This is the system's fracture point. The gap between an official narrative of control and the physical reality of escalating chaos. That is the precise location where wealth is destroyed. So let's be clear on the two critical takeaways for your new playbook. First, this crisis has created a permanent structural shift in global supply chains. That means higher costs and inflation are now embedded in the system for the foreseeable future. Second, the Geopolitical Risk Index is the data-driven model that explains why your portfolio is volatile, even when you're being told it shouldn't be. The old playbook of trusting reassuring official statements is broken. The new playbook is simple. Trust the data. As was said, the world didn't vote for this war, but the world is paying for it anyway. Your business, your portfolio, and your retirement plan depend on you seeing the world as it is, not as leaders wish it to be. This is the new operational reality. It is your responsibility to protect the assets you have built. If this analysis gave you a new framework for thinking about risk, subscribe for more data-driven insights that cut through the noise.